staying standing as a candidate. They cannot make sure that him will win because of the Asian region. And they
we stop the music, please? Ladies and gentlemen, please come back. We are ready to reconvene.
Good.
Ah oui, pas de problème, mais c'est tout bon.
Ok.
Je suis connecté, je suis la session en direct, donc ça devrait aller.
Très bien, et vous entendez, donc c'est parfait. Super,
Oui,
à tout à l'heure.
merci.
Merci à vous.
Welcome back to all of you. We continue our meeting with agenda item number 10. This is the report by the Treasurer and the Director General. The floor is for Uli Linder.
Mr. President, Council members, honorary members, and dear delegates. It's always a pleasure to speak about bookkeeping figures after the long day in the late afternoon. Therefore, I'm so happy. My task is to inform you about the financial situation of the ISU. We have a presentation for summary only, and I can tell you I will speak from the past, and the Director General, Freddy Schmidt, will speak from the future. For additional details, please refer to the 2018 to 2021 financial report and the 2022 to 2024 budget proposal. We show here the 4 past years because the last Congress was held in 2018 and you had no figures in the last 3 years, only by email. The structure of financial statement is in line with the Swiss accounting standards, in particular, but not limited to the following. In the income statement, the financial incomes and expenses are reported separately from the operating result. Inclusion of an annual report, including 6 mandatory topics. Inclusion of a cash flow statement. Online participation of the ISU external auditor from BDO at the Congress. The financial statement should follow the same structure introduced in 2016, with the exception that since 2018, the bonds and short-term deposits are counted for and presented in the balance sheet as their market value. When you see the first slide about the operating income, automatically you will, when you go on the end of these 4 years, you will realize the best year was in 2019. It is also the biggest TV income because we had the World Dream Trophy in Japan. The worst year here is 2020, which was caused by the pandemic, which we are coming later on. From the income, we had to finance also the contribution and prize money to the championships and other ISU various events. It is clear when we have more events, then we also have higher contributions and the opposite. Here As you can see, the highest contribution was in 2019, 2020, much less, and even 21. The next expenses are the development program. In development program, we had between 2018 and 2021 always about 149 to 123. This is not so big deviation. By B, the council projects, which is normally the support for the Junior Grand Prix, the Junior World Cup in speed and short track. Here we have a big deviation. And the contribution to the ISU members are in the last 2 years much higher as before, because we supported member federation with money due to the pandemic. The next point is the office building in Lausanne and ISU Secretariat. Here we do not have a big deviation, only in 2018, which the other operating expense was much higher. The reason is, in this year we had the Congress in Sevilla. ISU Secretariat and the office building have not a big deviation. When you look now the operating result, it means the income, as I showed at slide number 1, and all the operating expenses. You can see how was the operating result in these years. We had 1 positive year, 2019, and 3 negative year, 2018, 2020, and 2021. Now we come to the financial incomes expenses. This means from the money we have, we get interest back. You could see this is always about 6 million. We had financial expenses from the banks. We have realized capital exchange gains, and we also have unrealized capital exchange gains in these years. The worst was in 2020. One sense was the pandemic. The other is coming from the US dollar was falling down against Swiss francs. When we look now the whole together, all operating incomes, less operating expenses, less financial incomes and or plus financial incomes, we have in total some years which were very positive, like 2019, and the other years negative. To 2019, I have to say, when we prepared the annual balance sheet, this was made in February, March 2020. At that time, we were aware that something will go in very negative aspect because just the pandemic started. Therefore, we made from the good result in 2019 an allocation for reserves. We were not quite sure how the 2020 year will go on. And then from this reserve, we could do a dissolve in 2020 from 7.50 million. Therefore, the results, profit or loss of year, have small deviation, but in total, we had about minus 3 million in these 4 years. When you look the equity, it means the bonds and the money from ISU, when we had by begin 263 million, and now after these losses, we come back about 260, and the loss was for these 4 years 3 million. I hope you have not understand everything. That's my part. And Freddy Schmid will speak now from the future, from the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Linder. The floor is for the Director General, Mr. Schmid.
Thank you, Uli. Ladies and gentlemen, so let's talk about the future, namely the budget. First, a few considerations about the budgeting principles. It's again a 3 years budget, 22, 3, and 4, which means this year we amend the budget which had been approved last year through a mail vote for 22. And in 24, again, during the Congress, we can do the same. So it gives a certain flexibility not to get stuck for too long of a period with a budget. The budget was finalized on May 25, based on the situation, prospects, and intentions described in the ISU Annual Report 21, the 4-year plan status reports and new 4-year plans, as well as the President's report, situation and prospects being strongly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine. So all this has been taken into consideration. Thanks to the ISU equity, which was peaking in 2019 to 265 million Swiss francs, certain expenses could be increased during the past years. The equity consequently started to decline, and in order to maintain the agreed 255 million Swiss franc of equity threshold to safeguard the annual interest income of about 4 million Swiss francs, certain savings are necessary during this budget period. Now I specifically draw your attention to the risks and challenges described in the annual report to maintain and possibly increase the incomes and the necessary efforts to mitigate such risk. And I really invite you to read this annual report at the end of the financial statements. It goes in much detail on all the many challenges we are facing and all the many initiatives that are underway. This concerns in particular the area of marketing, media, communications, and research and development. Also, the increasing importance to comply with good governance and sustainability standards puts an additional burden on the ISU administration and requires additional human and financial resources. Now to the incomes. I will not go through all the years, but you see that over the 3 years we project 104 million Swiss francs of income. The budget has been based on existing commercial agreements, indications from the IOC, and the conservative estimates for items for which no formal agreements or commitments exist. However, in the past years, we really tried to have at least 3 to 5 years covered by commercial agreements so that we have a certain security for the coming years. One negative development, the IOC incomes in the past period just shown by Uli were 11 million. Unfortunately, the IOC advised us that based on preliminary figures from Beijing, the income to be distributed among the stakeholders will be lower at the level of Sochi, which means about 9 million Swiss francs per year. But the confirmation will follow later this year. So we are not sure exactly how the incomes will end up. Now, how are the incomes analyzed? You can see that the main income source for the ISU remains the TV media rights, fee incomes. The second biggest part comes from the Olympic Games, advertising rights, and financial incomes. And looking just at the biggest chunk, at the media TV rights fee incomes, you can see that Asia, and in particular Japan, is our biggest market. Now to the contributions and prize money to ISU championships and other ISU and various events. As you can see, we spent about, for the 3 years period, about 60 million francs directly to events, which is a pretty big chunk of all our incomes. So it goes directly back to the members and in favor of events. The contributions have been maintained at the same level as currently in place. In order to achieve necessary savings, the discretionary amounts at the disposal to the Council have been reduced compared to previous budget proposals. So in the past, the Council had quite a few amounts at its discretion. So when something happened that we had to help an organizer or anything to maybe save an event, the Council had plenty of flexibility. This flexibility is now reduced. However, in case there will be another situation like the pandemic, or if the war in Ukraine has even deeper consequences on the ISU activity, the Council has the option to use existing dedicated reserves, in particular the reserve for crisis situations amounting, as of December 31st, 2021, to 2.5 million francs. So this is always good to know that we are not in trouble immediately if there is a slight problem. Then we come to the development program. Again, in order to achieve certain savings, we have to come back to the level of 2016, which is still not bad compared to the years before, but is no longer at the level of the past few years. For 2022, we've maintained the budget because it's a year in progress, so we didn't want to come back to an approved budget. But for 23 and 24, the budget will be 8 million as it was, I think, in 2016. As to the allocation per category, the Council has certain discretion to make changes because it's impossible to foresee which are the most urgent needs. The budget here reflects the current understanding of the Council. So for projects, it would be 450 and 10.8, and for contributions to ISU members about 9 million, and a total of 24 million for the 3 years period. Now to the other operating expenses. You can see for 3 years we spent 42 million of overhead, let's say. Again, in order to achieve the necessary savings, the travel, meeting, event attendance and seminar courses expenses for 23 and 24 have been reduced by about 20%. Again, we didn't touch 22 because it's a year in progress and we didn't want to come back to an approved budget. Therefore, details must be worked out in cooperation with all ISU bodies, including the Council, during the budget meeting in the fall of 22. So we have to find ways to travel less, to spend less money in meetings and airfare and so forth, which obviously will cost some stress moments during this budget, but we have no choice. And one of the good things of the pandemic is that we learned how to better use Zoom and so online meetings. So this has become common practice now. We just have to find the right balance between in-person meetings, which are clearly necessary, but also online meetings, which have become very easy to organize now and everybody is used to them. With the increasing reliance on the ISU Secretariat for routine but also new tasks, the ISU Secretariat budget continues to increase. However, the number of staff remains on the low side compared to other comparable international federations. Also, we have to say that Switzerland is expensive, and but this is a political choice too, and changing would have other disadvantages. So this is a cost factor which unfortunately slowly, not much, but still is continuously increasing. Now the operating result, again, like Uli showed before for the past, it is not very glorious. So over the 3 years, the budget shows over 22 million of loss. This negative result shows the importance of the interest income as per the following slide. So if we only would do our skating activity and would have no financial activity, this would be the net loss of the next 3 years. Now the financial incomes and expenses. As you know, and as it has been approved for many, many years now, the investments of the ISU are limited to investment-grade bonds. So we do not invest in shares and in other financial instruments. This is obviously a very, very conservative approach. And in the long term, at least in the long term, it would be likely that a more aggressive investment policy would bring better yields. However, the ISU is not only a sports organization, it's also a political organization. There will be elections every 4 years. And in all my years, I have never found a council member who is willing to stand up here and explain after a stock market crash, while the ISU now has, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 millions less. So this is a political consideration, let's say, which limits our ability to take risks, which can be considered as a pity, but that's a political fact, and we are not the only political organization who has this dilemma. But we have to be very honest about it. No risk, no glory. But anyhow, getting about 4 million francs net of interest is not so bad either, as it brings us about 12 million Swiss francs of income, which is independent from the IOC, independent from sponsors. This is really a safety net we have and we can rely on. Just a remark, Uli showed some big losses in Swiss franc due to the dollar, but as we always explain, since the ISU activity is mostly in dollar, so even though we have less dollar, less Swiss francs equivalent of our dollar account, we still can do the same thing with those dollars. So this exchange rate we had for a few years does not really impact the ISU activity. So what counts is really the interest income, which we calculate with an average interest rate of about 2%, which gives us about 12 million for the period. Then it brings us to the last page, profit loss of the year. So here you can say that the operating loss looks now much better on the bottom line. So we are down to about, let's say, a more reasonable loss for 3 years of 10.62 million Swiss francs. This means that potentially the ISU equity might drop below the 255 million threshold that the council or the council proposed and the Congress agreed in 2014 or 15, I think, as a threshold. Therefore, besides continuously striving to secure the current income sources and developing new ones, further cost savings measures are required beyond those included in this budget proposal. So for the future periods, you have to count with, yet again, some budget cuts. The newly elected council will have to evaluate if this may also include a review of ISU contributions to organizing ISU members of ISU championships. And these, compared to other sports, today remain very generous. However, since ISU championships have already been mostly allotted through 24, such reduction would not be applicable before 25. So the council says we might have to make savings, but those championships we have allotted with an indication of the ISU contribution, we do not come back on our commitment. But for new allotments, the new council will have to consider whether for certain championships the contributions might be too much and we would have to decrease. Now this is a lot of bad news. I have one good news. Those who have studied the financial statements see that we still have the premises, our offices, our former offices in Davos, also in Switzerland. When we moved in 1997, we tried to sell those. They were bought for 800,000 Swiss francs in the 70s. In 1997, when we moved to Lausanne, we could have sold them for even less than the 800,000. So the council at that time decided, no, this is not a good time for real estate in Davos. Let's try to rent them and wait for better days. Now the better days have come. Real estate in the mountains, also thanks to COVID, is booming. So the new council, the current council, decided that we should put this on sale, and we have a potential buyer, and all going well, at the end of the week we might be able to confirm that we have a sale done, which probably would result in a net profit of 1.3 million Swiss franc. This is very much good news to help a little bit, especially I talked before about this discretion to the council, which is now maybe too strongly reduced. So if this sale materializes at this level, we would propose on Friday that the 1.3 million income, which is a profit because the offices were totally depreciated, and in the ISU books at 1 franc, that the council would have the discretion over the next 3 years to use this amount at its discretion for emergency situations, but only if this goes through. So I wanted to finish this with some good news. Now in conclusion, just to remind you that as per Article 30, paragraph 21 of the ISU Constitution, the Congress decides on the principles, and my presentation was a summary of the principles which you have in the budget document. But obviously the budget document is based on many, many more pages with very detailed budget, and the council decides on the details. And finally, the decisions to be taken under Congress agenda item D19, budget on Friday, June 10. We have put this Treasurer and Director General report for many years now at the beginning, so when you discuss proposals, you know more or less how the financial situation is, so you can take this into account when you make your decisions. So thank you very much, and I'm already available for questions together with Uli at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt. If there are no questions. Yeah.
It's just a comment to follow on from the financials that, you know, the last couple of years have been a very wild ride out in the business world. But directed directly at Uli, you, your team, the council and secretariat have truly done an amazing job in managing wisely the ISU finances. I, and hopefully the rest of the room will join me in thanking you. Please continue the excellent financial stewardship.
Thank you very much. Then we can move on to the next item. 11, report by the legal advisor, Mr. Keislinger.
Dear President, members of the Council, honorary members, delegates, office holders, ladies and gentlemen, this was easy coast. Now it comes to the legal report for 4 years, and I'm sorry for making much boring information and hoping not to misuse your kind patience. It is with deep regret that I'm in front of you today alone, without Beatrice Pfister, who has asked me to pass on her apologies and best regards and wishes. Beatrice recovered from a serious operation on her back, turned out so burdensome that finally she saw no other alternative than to resign. In the days we were together, we were frequently consulted by the Council, the President, the Director General, the technical committees, the directors and sports directors, and the commissions on a great variety of issues, ranging from questions related to the ISU statutes, commercial and employment contracts, the relationship between the ISU, the IOC, and WADA, national anti-doping agencies, and ISU members. Since 2020, the high volume of legal issues has led to the involvement of Mr. Pierre Kobel, whom you see next to me on the podium, a well-known attorney who is a founding partner of Athena Law in Geneva, specialized in competition law and intellectual property rights, urgently needed by the ISU, in addition to his knowledge on Swiss law. He actually had dealt with the review of the commercial contracts the ISU is a party to, in particular with EST Sport Service, with SCG for mobile applications and display on smartphones, with Getty, with the contract for the next ISU Congress, and he substituted Beatrice in the sports-related matters in the context of the armed conflict in Ukraine. He has supported me and the German attorney, Mr. Christian Keidel from Munich, who runs cases for several international sports federations, including the International Biathlon Union, and drafted the supplement to Rule 107 of the ISU General Regulations that has been submitted for your kind approval. In relation to ISU statutes, in preparation of the Congress 2020, which had to be postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Beatrice and I went through the ISU Constitution, the general and special regulations and technical rules, in order to identify inconsistencies and possibilities for logistic improvement in a new edition of these sets of law. What has been submitted to your kind approval by email vote in 2020 and 2021 was to quite some degree the result of this work. To advise the Council on how to organize the postponement of the Congress 2020 and first to 2021 and finally to 2022, and organization of email voting in 2020 and 2021 was certainly the most challenging task related to the ISU statutes. In 2 other matters, we became members of 3 inspiring teams. One was led by Council member Patricia St. Peter, updating the ISU Code of Ethics in line with the ISU Code of Ethics, and considering the quite burning issues of sexual and other harassment, as well as betting and match fixing in sport. Another team was led by the coordinator of the Development Commission, Susanna Rachamo, to create an e-learning module on the Code of Ethics, which you saw already today. We advised on avoidance of any legal issues in this context. And the third team was led by the Athletes Commission and paved the way to increasing the legal weight of the skaters inside the ISU in line with respective IOC initiatives and the new ISU athlete safeguarding policy was a joint result of the first and third teams and was so well done that it did not cause any legal headache. Otherwise, our work related to the ISU statutes included lawyers' routine business, including some challenging issues. We were asked for guidance and advice on correct interpretation and application of specific ISU provisions, in particular regarding membership issues, clearance certificates, conflict of interest situations, and certain sporting rules. The ISU anti-doping rules and ISU anti-doping procedures had to be adjusted to the new World Anti-Doping Code 2021. The Anti-Doping Director, Christine Cadiz, and the ISU Medical Commission chaired by Dr. Jane Moraine made our work in this context rather easier. The same can be stated with regard to a number of ISU communications excellently prepared by the ISU vice presidents, directors, sport directors, as well as technical committees. All rule proposals of the Council and technical committees to this Congress were reviewed by us. I take the opportunity to thank the President, the Vice Presidents, the Council, Director General and Treasurer, all office holders and ISU bodies, ISU officials and the members of the ISU Secretariat for their continued trust, dedication, and great cooperation. As to contract, apart from the ISU statutes and until the engagement of Pierre Kobel, we dealt with an ever-growing number of contractual matters related to consultancy, marketing and sponsoring, anti-doping and employment matters, insurance, event-related matters, and many others. The ISU is quite a big organization, and as experienced professionals, you can no doubt imagine how many complex legal issues arrive at such an entity. In particular, at a time when the European Union also started to reach out to a non-member like Switzerland, where the ISU is based. The most challenging issues certainly resulted from the entry into force of the EU General Data Protection Regulation. This fact had quite some impact on the exchange of data between the ISU and its members, but also between the ISU and WADA. As for litigation, Beatrice and I had to involve the ISU Disciplinary Commission by means of statements of complaint, primarily in 3 areas: anti-doping, national bias in judging, and improper disciplinary behavior. With regard to anti-doping, the chair of the ISU Disciplinary Commission will report on these cases dealt with by the Commission, and let me therefore focus on the work done in anti-doping apart from these cases. The results of WADA investigations in the context of anti-doping data manipulations by the Moscow WADA-accredited anti-doping laboratory before and during the Sochi Olympic Winter Games 2014 involved a number of Russian skaters. Together with the ISU Anti-Doping Director and the chair of the ISU Medical Commission, we had to screen the pieces of evidence brought to our knowledge by WADA and to determine whether the evidence was strong enough to start anti-doping proceedings against these skaters. The ISU in addition engaged Professor Soji, the former director of the Swiss Anti-Doping Laboratory and Center of Research and Expertise in Anti-Doping Sciences at the University of Lausanne, who had previously advised the ISU in quite a number of anti-doping cases and asked to give his expert opinion. Based on this accumulated review, the ISU Anti-Doping Director elaborated a case-by-case summary to which we gave a final command, and which then was submitted to WADA for joint closure of the respective cases. All cases except one were closed. One case was forwarded to the Russian anti-doping agency, RUSADA, because the relevant testing had been ordered by them. This case led to the finding of an anti-doping rule violation and sanction. The ISU accepted this decision. One tricky case in the reporting period concerned a skater from Belarus. At an in-competition test in early 2019, a beta-2 agonist was found in the skater's sample. The skater had indicated the use of a dietary supplement on his doping control form and confirmed and detailed this information in his written explanation to the ISU. He confessed that he had not read the list of components attached to this supplement. This would have been a clear case of an anti-doping rule violation. However, in parallel, the ISU investigations brought to light that the respective anti-doping laboratory had reported the case at a level of below 10 nanogram per milliliter, whereas the respective WADA technical document stated that this substance should not be reported at such level. This fact led to the involvement of Dr. Jane Morin and Professor Martial Soji and an ensuring exchange of correspondence between WADA and the ISU. Beatrice and I, based on the medical confirmation, found that the case should not be considered as an anti-doping rule violation because the laboratory, upon previous advice of WADA, had not acted properly based on the applicable rules. But when WADA insisted on opening an anti-doping rule violation case, we submitted a statement of complaint to the ISU Disciplinary Commission asking for declaration of an anti-doping rule violation and imposition of a sanction, which were both denied by the ISU Disciplinary Commission. WADA obviously considered the case as a leading one and appealed to CAS, and CAS finally found that the use of the word should instead of shall in the technical document, together with the drafting history of this provision and its application in practice, allowed the discretion used by the laboratory and therefore set aside the decision of the ISU Disciplinary Commission and sanctioned the skater with a 2-year period of ineligibility. A Japanese case related to the 2018 Olympic Winter Games in Pyeongchang led to the conclusion of a settlement agreement before the CAS Anti-Doping Division and termination order when convincing expert evidence had been brought forward by the skater that contamination caused by a sick third person was the origin of the prohibited substance. Currently, one Spanish case related to the 2022 Olympic Winter Games Beijing is pending before the CAS Anti-Doping Division. As you will certainly know, according to the World Anti-Doping Code, the ISU is responsible for anti-doping in its sports worldwide. This includes final responsibility for doping also within ISU members. Non-compliant behavior of an ISU member can lead to non-compliance of the ISU as a whole. This is the reason why the ISU must be informed of each anti-doping rule violation case occurring in the sphere of competence of the ISU members. As a rule, the ISU members have to delegate anti-doping results management to a national anti-doping agency, according to their national law. The national anti-doping agencies are bound to apply national anti-doping laws, which follow their own legal tradition, and thus in some cases differ from the ISU anti-doping rules. In addition, The respective procedures take place in the state languages of a given ISU member and lead to decisions made in that language or those languages. On quite a few occasions, the ISU then had to approach its respective member to provide a translation of such decision into English. Since there are short deadlines for a possible appeal to CAS, this is unpleasant for both the ISU member as well as the ISU, but there is no alternative. For reasons of consistent application of the ISU anti-doping rules, we had to appeal a decision of the Hungarian NATO. CAS in this case partly granted our appeal. In most cases, luckily, we could accept the decision of the respective NATO, sometimes after further investigation, for example, with regard to RUSADA, GNADA, and the Israeli NATO. The most recent such case overshadowed the 2022 Olympic Winter Games in Beijing, and since it had a direct impact on the Games, had to be appealed from there. The CAS Anti-Doping Division rejected the ISU's as well as the IOC's and WADA's appeals, setting a precedent with regard to the application of a provisional suspension on a protected person, which means an athlete below the age of 16. The main procedure at RUSADA is continuing, and the ISU, as for all other such cases, reserves the right to receive the decision in English and to evaluate whether the case can be closed or must be appealed in the interests of an equal, uniform, consistent, and fair standard of anti-doping throughout the ISU family and ISU sports. Only such practice safeguards the ISU's status of being compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code. Other disciplinary measures. Here I'm happy to be able to inform you that the number of cases where we had to witness such offenses, for example, violations of the ISU Code of Ethics, was considerably smaller than in the period 2016 to 2018. There were 4 cases of judging with national bias in the reporting period which came to our knowledge. Obviously, the decisions of the ISU Disciplinary Commission in the previous period and the new rule for evaluation of service officials in figure skating led to greater awareness of the problem and a consistent assessment system. A 5th case was dismissed recently. In addition, 1 case of other unethical behavior ended up at the ISU Disciplinary Commission, and to our knowledge, 2 cases, one involving an official and one involving a skater, are currently under review according to the criminal law of an ISU member. In 1 case of various unethical behavior which fell outside the authority of the ISU, we advised the Council not to consider the respective person for its development program. As to the ISU Code of Ethics, we advise all of you, unless you have already done so, to make use of the e-learning module on the ISU Code of Ethics on the ISU website. It is, as you saw, as instructive as entertaining. Since we are most likely on the eve of disclosure of cases of violence and harassment against skaters, please be reminded of your obligation to incorporate the ISU Code of Ethics at your national level. You are free to copy the text as far as is reasonable and applicable for your national situation. 1 disciplinary case leads me to the complex range of activities with legal implications that the COVID-19 pandemic created for the ISU. Escata did not comply with the protective measures against this disease in the context of an out-of-competition doping test, thereby endangering the health of a doping control official. The chair of the Disciplinary Commission certainly will give you further details. Apart from this case, we were involved in a flood of cancellations of ISU events in the efforts to set up a reliable bubble system for those events that could be safeguarded, and advised the Council and Medical Commission in setting up general and sport-specific guidelines for organizing ISU events during the COVID-19 period, and respective waiver forms. You can imagine that cancellations of events led to contractual issues which needed to be solved by negotiations with the other contract parties and the organizers. We thank the ISU President, Director General and Treasurer for skilled negotiations that ended in prudent solutions that were acceptable to all sides involved and which minimized the damage caused by the pandemic. As for the guidelines and bubble system, our main focus was on avoidance of any kind of discrimination. We tried to make sure that all eligible participants that wanted to take part at an event could do so. Where this could not be guaranteed by the organizer, a replacement solution had to be developed as far as reasonable and feasible. Our last report started with the words, "No report of the legal advisors would ever seem complete without the Pechstein case," whose origins go back 9 years, and ended with the sentence, "While the outcome of a court case is never certain, there's one thing we can assure all of you. You will hear the name Pechstein again in our report to the Phuket Congress." Unfortunately, Beatrice and I were right. In the meantime, the case has gone for 13 years. And during the 3 years and 11 months since the Congress 2018, the case before the German Constitutional Court was like a blank screen in front of the ISU. We had no access to the complaint, were not a party before the court, and could only wonder why nothing seemed to happen. Following a letter from the German Constitutional Court dated May 4th, 2022, and received by the ISU about a week later, we now see that the complaint was first submitted to the German Constitutional Court on 16th July 2016, but with a request to suspend the proceedings until a decision of the German Supreme Court on a complaint against its decision. The German Supreme Court turned down the complaint of 11th July 2016 on 12th July 2016 and notified Mrs. Pechstein of this on September 1st, 2016. Mrs. Pechstein, as a consequence, expanded her complaint to the German Constitutional Court to this further decision of the German Supreme Court by request dated 12 September 2016. Further to that, Mrs. Pechstein asked for an end of the suspension. However, for 2 years, the German Constitutional Court obviously put the complaint on hold. On November 19, 2018, Mrs. Pechstein informed the German Constitutional Court of the outcome of the Mutu-Pechstein case versus Switzerland before the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. This court had found, by decision of its third chamber on 2nd of October 2018, that the allegations of a violation of Article 6, Paragraph 1 of the European Convention on Human Rights of Mrs. Pechstein and Mr. Mutu, because of a lack of impartiality and independence of CAS, were dismissed. The court found, however, that in the case of Mrs. Pechstein, this article was violated as to the aspect that CAS had not granted her a public hearing as she had asked for. In her information to the German Constitutional Court, Mrs. Pechstein referred to this fact and to the dissenting opinions of two judges as to the impartiality and independence of CAS and the necessity of a Swiss law on CAS. On March 21, 2019, Mrs. Pechstein informed the German Constitutional Court that her request to refer the European Court's decision to the Grand Chamber for final decision was rejected on 4th February 2019. Thus, the decision of 2nd October 2018 became final. She repeated her arguments from her unsuccessful request at the European Court of Human Rights, and it is therefore with an alarm that another 3 years later, the ISU has now been asked by the German Constitutional Court to provide, within a very short deadline, a statement and address on the question of whether the finding of the European Court of Human Rights, in particular concerning a violation of Article 6, Paragraph 1 of the European Convention on Human Rights, due to lack of a public hearing, has any impact on the decisions of the German Supreme Court attacked before the German Constitutional Court. On 2nd June 2022, last week, the Munich professor of International and Public Law, Professor Dr. Christian Walter, submitted the statement of the ISU to which our German attorneys, Keidel, Dr. Heiner, Dr. Fischer, as well as the injurer's attorney, Dr. Förster, and I contributed. We did our very best, but at any event, sorry to say, you may well expect a further round of information at the next ISU Congress. This is the Ice Derby website. You will certainly remember our report to the last Congress on the Ice Derby case. During the Pyeongchang Olympic Winter Games, an appeal against the unfavorable decision of the European Commission was filed at the EU General Court. The hopes of Beatrice and me to have better news from the EU front than at the last Congress became a reality. At least, the appeal was partly granted on 16th December 2020. The EU General Court held, however, that the ISU eligibility rules in their 2016 and previous versions violated EU competition law. The General Court accepted, to the opposite, the pre-authorization system of the ISU, which is an enormously important achievement. It means the requirement that competitions organized by other parties than the ISU and or its members must be previously approved by the Council. Most importantly, the EU General Court acknowledged that the fight against betting and the protection of the economic interests of the ISU are legitimate objectives of its pre-authorization system. The EU General Court further accepted that jurisdiction in appeals against Council eligibility decisions is conferred upon CAS. The Council followed our advice to give the green light to our attorney in this procedure, Mr. Jean-François Bellis, who generously declared that he would bear the risks of costs to file a partial appeal against the decision of the EU General Court to the European Court of Justice. We saw the following major advantages of such appeal. If successful, The appeal would bring about legal security in that the ISU could then absolutely rely on its current eligibility rules to be in conformity with the EU competition law. Further, entities interested in organizing skating events like Ice Derby would receive the clear signal that they have to accept the procedure and conditions of the current eligibility rules, and such entities could not reasonably attack these rules before any EU authorities again, provided the ISU sticks to and properly applies the rules. A successful appeal would help to protect the IOC and the other Olympic sport federations against outsiders trying to organize events in their sports against their respective rules. If the European Court of Justice, following its own precedents, confirms that a violation of EU competition law by object must be proved taking into account the specific facts of each individual case and cannot be established by purely abstract reasoning, any attack against such rules claimed to be a by-object violation of EU competition law would have to overcome the hurdle of proving that the respective rule or its application in a specific case actually aims at the restriction of competition. If successful, the appeal could free the ISU and its council from the reproach maintained in the decision of the EU General Court that it had acted based on motives that are prohibited by EU law, thereby serving and restoring its good reputation. Mr. Bellis filed the partial appeal to the European Court of Justice on February 26, 2021, and he asked the European Court to set aside the judgment of the General Court insofar as the ISU's appeal against the Commission's decision was dismissed, and to annul the Commission decision of December 8, 2017. The case was registered at the European Court of Justice, and you can find it there easily as case C124 21. The European Commission submitted its answer on 12 May 2021 and not surprisingly asked for dismissal of the ISU's appeal. The European Elite Athletes Association, the so-called EU Athletes, and Mark-Jan Hendrik Tuitert and Niels Kersthold asked the same in their answer of 25th May 2021, sorry. On 16th June 2001, the ISU was even served a cross-appeal submitted by the EU athletes and the two former ISU skaters. The EU athletes complained that due to the appeals arbitration rules, athletes have no real choice but to accept the exclusive competence of the CAS. Mr. Bellis answered the responses on behalf of the ISU on 12th August 2021 and the cross-appeal on 25th August 2021. The European Commission supported the cross-appeal by its answer, also dated of the same day, 25th August 2021. The request of the EU athletes and two former ISU skaters of 9th September 2021 to be granted the right to a reply was rejected by the court on the same day. The European Commission answered the ISU answer of 12th August 2021 by rejoinder on 23rd September 2021, and the athletes skaters did so on 11th October 2021. This terminated the procedure in writing. We waited quite some time for a decision on whether and when a hearing will be held. The reason for the delay is that the ISU case is dealt with by the same judge rapporteur as the one in charge of the Spanish court reference for a preliminary ruling in the UEFA Super League case. Mr. Bellis informed us that the hearings in both cases will take place on the same day, Ice Derby in the morning and Super League in the afternoon of 12th July 2022. A few months later, we might receive the Advocate General's opinion. The judgment might be taken by the European Court of Justice by the end of 22 or in the first half of 23. Reason enough to bother you again with this matter at the next Congress in 2024. Sorry. Thank you for your kind attention, and I'm glad to answer questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keislinger. If there are no questions, then despite it's after 5, I have to jump to item number 14, the auditor report, since the auditors are waiting online. So before closing the meeting for today, I move on to item number 14. Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. President. And here we have now online our auditor, Mr. Gehring from BDO Lausanne. Can you hear us, Mr. Gehring?
Yes, very well, Mr. Schmidt. Greetings from Switzerland.
So we have to strongly apologize to you for the delay. Poor Mr. Gehring was getting up early in the morning to be ready. And there was, for known reasons, a delay. So please accept our apologies that we destroyed your Monday, which is at the same time a public holiday in Switzerland. So it's very unfortunate. I don't say this so I don't put question to him, but anyway. Swiss law requires that the approval, the point number 14, report by the auditors with respect to the financial administration of the ISU since the last Congress, the approval thereof, and the discharge of the Council, Director General, Treasurer, and Sports Directors with respect thereto, so that the auditors are present, so members can put questions to them to make sure that we don't hide anything to the Assembly. Since the Congress is in Thailand, we agreed to do this online, and we are very thankful to BDO and Mr. Gehring to be available. Now, I refer to the auditor's report. Since we didn't have a General Assembly since 2018, even though we approved them through email, we still feel it's better that we have them now formally approved for the years 2018, 2019, 20, and 21. So you have received them before by email. Here you have received the hard copies, and you have received the report from Uli Linder, our treasurer. Therefore, I ask if you have questions to Mr. Gehring. Maybe it's better you have a questions, if not he was waiting for nothing the whole day. But anyway, don't fabricate either, I mean. Are there any questions for the auditors? I'm really embarrassed.
It's not a problem if there are no questions.
We know that auditors are not allowed to accept any kind of favor, but I think we owe you a lunch next time we meet.
With pleasure.
So, since there are no questions, I then ask the Congress for approval of the Auditor's Report 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, and the discharge of the Council, Director General, Treasurer, and Directors with respect thereto. If you agree, kindly show the green card, which hopefully is still on the table. Any opposition? Anybody against? Red card? Abstain? Nobody. Therefore, the council and the director and and the treasurer is discharged. Thank you, and again, apologies to Lausanne, and thank you very much, and have a good day, nevertheless.
No problem. Same to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Then I would like to suggest that we close the meeting for today and we move on to item number 12 tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I understand there is now a rehearsal for the election procedure for the voting, but the meeting of the plenary session now is closed and we continue tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you very much and enjoy your dinner tonight. Thank you.